Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Fitz, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well, Ray. It's kind of unusual, just you and me tonight.
Yeah, it's kind of refreshing, you know. Be honest with you, we get a word in edgewise here as you kind of go. You know, this past season, Jim, at Cold Red, saw us diving into the infamous Center City rapist case that both you and I had the chance of working. And we focused a lot based on what our guests talked about, the missteps of law enforcement and how they handled sexual assault cases. A lot of people will argue and say that sexual assault cases, because of this case and others like it around the country, have kind of changed the landscape of how law enforcement is looking into sexual assault cases and how victims are investigated. You know, it took us a whole season to kind of highlight this.
20
And
episodes, Ray, 20 episodes.
I
But
know.
everyone had valuable information in it with we'll call them our guest hosts, Chuck and Sil.
You know, and the funny thing is, Jim, is that usually you and I have the opportunity to talk about some of these things that are occurring in our communities. And over the last few weeks, last month, there's been things that have really gone on that I know you and I have talked about off camera, but I would love to talk about now. And why don't you start us out? What's your pitch? And I know you were on Fox News with Laura Ingraham talking about this. What's your take on James Comey and what happened there?
Well, since you bring that up, Ray, my Fox News hit, I was asked early that day to come on. It was a Thursday, and I was asked to talk about the Dallas shooting of at the ICE agents, which unfortunately killed two detainees and injured others. And up till 6:59 that night, that's what I'm talking about. I did some research, other shootings, what ICE is doing out there, and we'll discuss ICE a little bit later on today. And then I get the studio vans in front of my house. I'm in there, all ready to go, and I get a message in my ear from the producer. Jim, we're switching gears. We're dropping the Dallas ICE shooting issue. We're going to talk about James Comey. Are you okay with that? Because he had literally just been indicted, or at least the news came out about an hour before that Thursday afternoon. And I was with another guy, Jim Gagliano, another retired FBI agent, good guy, and we both just had to pivot, as they say in football, call an audible, and we did the best we could.
Well, you
So,
know, Jim, what they say in New York, you did the New York shuffle.
well, I think we did a two-step together, Jim and I, and Laura had to do it too. I'm sure she has producers. The Dallas news, the shooting is old news. Let's talk about Comey. So I didn't have any facts or figures in front of me. Neither did my the other retired FBI agent, Gaglione. But nonetheless, we did our best to pivot there. So yeah. So without repeating really too much what I said that night, I mean, you play with fire and sometimes you get burnt. And I mean, neither you or I ever worked for Comey. I think I'm correct about.
I did the last year and a half, Jim.
Okay. I know you retired after me. And actually, I worked with him in the Southern District of New York when he was an assistant U.S. attorney there, working some bank robberies together. Real big guy. You couldn't miss him.
I
You know,
know.
he was a fine attorney, nothing more, nothing less in terms of some of the cases we worked. And but you know what? I mean, you know, they say J. Edgar Hoover was political. Neither of us worked for him. He was long gone before you and I entered the bureau. But he died in early 1972. Ray, you and I came in the late 80s. So they say he was political. My boy, he had 50 years to be political. Comey in is about 3 years, give or take. He was very political there too, starting with the July of 2016 notice that Hillary Clinton was going to be charged for all the stuff she did with the emails and the hidden servers and all that stuff, which no FBI director should really be getting involved in that. And then the whole thing later in the election cycle with the laptop of Anthony Weiner, who was the husband of one of Hillary's strong colleagues, working colleagues. And then, of course, everything he did after that with Arctic Frost, Operation Crossfire Hurricane, and the FISA lies and whatever, and testifying before Congress. And folks, if you listen to us long enough, Ray and I try to stay apolitical. You can put your profiling hat on. I hereby anoint everyone out there as profilers in this regard. You can maybe guess where we come from, but there are enough political podcasts out there. We don't want to get into that. But over what's the expression, overstepped his skis, and in just too many ways he was political. He surrounded himself with yes men who did his beck and call, or perhaps the other way around. And he said some things to some people. Other people testified in front of Congress that he said something different. So some high-ranking executive in the FBI lied, either McCabe or Comey, about who gave information to the media. And the statute of limitations at least hadn't expired for Comey as of a few weeks ago, and that's what we were asked to comment on. So Ray, you and I are big on presumption of innocence, innocent until proven guilty, due process. We get that, but he's not the answer to these particular charges and this indictment, and we'll see where it goes.
You know, Comey's always been a polarizing figure. Some see him as a defender of institutional integrity, and others as overly political. I, for one, knew something was wrong when he says that we're not going to prosecute Hillary Clinton. And I thought, when did the FBI start making those decisions? I thought that was DOJ's responsibility. I've never seen that happen. In my almost 27 years, I've never seen that happen. So whether you agree with Comey or not, his commentary has sparked a lot of debate about the state of law enforcement and whether the community, whether the society trusts us anymore. I think it's worth asking, Jim, and I don't know, just throw your 2 cents in here. Do you think what he actually reflects is what is actually happening in federal agencies, or is it mostly his personal viewpoint?
I'm sorry, about how he led the FBI or what he's doing
no,
now?
In other words, some of the things that he says, which, when he speaks for the agency. So what he said, does it reflect of what is really happening within the FBI, or is it just his personal opinion?
Well, does that include 8647 made out in the Seychelles?
Go figure with that.
Right. Well, I mentioned this. I was surprised this came top of mind. I don't really like that expression, but when I was talking to Laura that night, again, we made that quick pivot. And here's something I'll never forget. And it was the Women's March in 2017. Trump had already been inaugurated, or it was like a week away, and for his first presidency. And I'll never forget, somehow, some way, I didn't watch it live. I could care less that day about that particular protest. I don't watch any protest, no matter who does it, live on TV. But some people did some, YouTube highlights. And here, out of the blue, CNN happened to find Mrs. Comey, James Comey's wife, and I believe it was 2 of her adult daughters. And they put a microphone in her face. She identified herself as, I forget her first name, Comey, and the 2 daughters. And she is sort of railing, I won't say anti-Trump, but putting questions out there, commentary. And it was staged and it was set up. And
Absolutely.
I said with Laurie the night, she has every right to do this. First Amendment, she has every right. But if you're an FBI agent, especially the director, Ray, you and I both have spouses, partners. Back in our FBI days, we wouldn't want them out there in front of CNN, bad mouthing the present administration. It could be very problematic for a working agent. Of course, he was a director, a little bit different there. If that's coming out of his wife and daughters, and again, they have a right to do that, that just tells you the mindset within the family. And certainly, there's no doubt Jim Comey gave them the okay to do that. Probably
Absolutely.
contacted his friends at CNN. So he definitely says things that he means about the FBI, but he also has surrogates do it for him, including his buddy, I think, at Columbia University, who he gave some, I think, classified information to, or at least
Correct.
law enforcement sensitive, and that person then released it to the press. So Comey can say, oh, I never released it to the press, but he gave it to his friend to release to the press. So, you know what? A jury will, I think it'll be Northern Virginia. A jury will hear all the facts. I have a feeling it's not just what we see on TV. I have a feeling there's a lot of emails that the Bureau has in their possession now that Comey may have think they deleted and his colleagues deleted, but they didn't. And tied into that, Ray, just yesterday it broke about, was this squad CR-15 in the Washington field office, C-15, who was following around and getting phone records of about a dozen different Republican senators in 2023. Now, Comey was out then, but Director Wray was in. What the hell is that? And we may need some more information, but that again is the weaponization of law enforcement, of the criminal justice system, that no one in any agency should be doing, much less the FBI. Comey will have a trial, be a fair trial. My namesake, Pat Fitzgerald, no relation, is his attorney. I knew him in the Southern District of New York too, a good attorney, and we'll just see where this whole thing goes.
I just all I'm looking for, I'm not going to pass judgment. That's not what you and I do. But I want to make sure that there's accountability, because I never want to see something like this happen again. In the last 10 years, this has been a shit show. And I never, ever want to see something like this happen again, where the FBI and other federal agencies are alleged to have been weaponized. And a lot of the information that's out there, and we're not going to get into that because we could spend the whole show doing that, have been proven. They're facts. From Russiagate to the slapping down of Hunter Biden's laptop and all the other things that have gone on. It's just, I just never want to see it again. And the only way to do that is to hold people accountable. And every way that happens.
And we'll save maybe for a future episode the 274 agents that were supposedly on the ground January 6th, 2021. And also related to that, NEAL Team 6, as they were called, the agents who knelt down in front of some Black Lives Matter protesters. We don't have to get into that. Those agents were fired. And the agents on the C-15 squad we just talked about, they were fired. And no one likes to see anyone out of a job at all. And I'm assuming due process is being followed, and they will also have their day in court if they choose to take it that way.
That's
But
what
we
I hope
stand for
that happens.
fidelity, bravery, and integrity.
Right.
And you have to ask yourself if you're kneel. And you know what? If someone knelt down when Trump was walking by, FBI agents, I'd say no, that's wrong too.
I
And
agree.
they should be certainly disciplined, if not fired. Agents have to be objective. You can vote for who you want. You can donate money to whatever campaign you want. But when you're doing the job, you have to be objective and follow the rules of law and the Constitution. And I have some serious questions about, what we just mentioned here about some of these agents.
Let's see if we can shift gears here. I'd like to turn to Charlie Kirk. He was a polarizing individual, and God rest his soul, he was assassinated. Charlie Kirk, I'm sure as everybody knows, he was the founder of Turning Point USA, and he was a prominent conservative commentator. He's done numerous news interviews. He's been involved in controversies, but his ability to shape young audiences was his strength. His role in mobilizing grassroots political campaigns, I really believe he was a major force that helped Trump get elected because of what he did. And I'm going to say this, we could talk about the other individual that assassinated him, but I really don't want to spend any time on him, to be honest with you. But I
called him a pansy on the air before he turned himself. I was going to use another P word with Laura, but I thought I better not.
Right.
So he's a pansy.
But I've never seen an individual that has created such a mobilization to Christianity. And this is not about Christianity, this show, but just what he's been able to do and what he's been able to press. And he preached the gospel in every single one of his gatherings. He always talked about the gospel. He talked about Jesus. He talked about how he was saved. And all those things it just resonated with the youth. And I'll be honest with you, just my personal opinion. I'm happy to see that happen. I'm happy to see people come back to God. I think that's important. And I hope I don't offend anybody in the audience, but if I do, too bad, because that's the way I feel. And that's my opinion. I'm allowed to have my opinion as well.
Certainly are. I won't critique what you just said, but I think words like polarizing and controversial are open to interpretation. I didn't find him polarizing or controversial for some of the reasons you just said, but I get it. Other people did. All he really did was ask and answer questions, or be asked questions and then answer them. And you don't have to agree with everything he said, but dear God Almighty, he didn't deserve to get a bullet through the neck. And, no young men out there about his age, and they took this very hard. This was, in a way, their Kennedy assassination. And Ray, we were both little kids, but I do remember it, how
I do
tragic that was, and how the country just was just so depressed for a few, for months afterwards, but certainly that whole long weekend. Then, of course, Lee Harvey Oswald getting shot live on TV on that Sunday, 2 days later. But this was difficult for many young people who just listened to a guy who said, please come engage with me. Come up to the mic. I won't call you names. Don't call me names. Some of them, the people did insist on calling him names, but he just worked around them. And I'll tell you, Ray, I know you have your doctorate degree. I have a couple of masters. I wouldn't want to get in debate with Charlie. And he's a college dropout. He admitted it, but he does a lot of reading. He, talked to different people over the years. And nowadays, there's nothing wrong with that. And maybe college isn't for everyone. And he's the kind of example that, but just have a mission in life. And if you can find God, doesn't have to be the Christian one. It could be someone else, but someone who kind of has a spiritual effect on you. I think, if nothing else, Charlie, that's his legacy. And what a beautiful woman his wife, his widow, Eric, is. I don't mean just physically, but just everything about her, and that she actually forgives his shooter. I'm not sure I could do that. I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure I could do that.
That was the right thing to do, according to her. That's talk about the strength. I mean, look, and this will be the last thing I say about Charlie Kirk. I mean, I don't think it was him, the man that was speaking up there. I've never, ever come across anybody in all my years on this earth that had the wide range of knowledge that man did at such a young age. I don't care what you threw at him. And they try to throw a lot of different topics, and he was well-versed in everything. And the only way to be that well-versed is that I believe the Holy Spirit was speaking through him. I really believe that, because there's no way, just as though when the assassination of Trump, there's no way Trump should have survived that without divine intervention. And I'm telling you that what happened to Charlie was in God's plan. And some people say, how could that be God's plan? But look what it's done. If you look at some of the videos, go on TikTok or Instagram or X, and you look around the country and these gatherings where they're praying and they're giving themselves to Jesusness, what else caused that but Charlie Kirk? I mean, so I look at him, and you're right. Anybody that came to him, he never argued. He was always monotone. He never made fun of people. I mean, it was like he was giving everybody a theology lesson. And he was just able, as a counselor, people come up and people would be really struggling. And he would just say, well, tell me, would you be comfortable sharing your story with me? And people would just start talking to him. He was amazing. He was an amazing individual. And I didn't know much about him until after this happened. I started finding out more and more about him. So
it's a tough one for the younger people out there, and for us older people too. And sometimes I talk to my kids and others, and what kind of world did we leave them? And I'll say this to our audience now for the younger people, but of course it was someone 10 years younger than Charlie that shot him, whose names we don't use, and the pansy that he is, but all kinds of confusion. It goes back to what kind of drugs are these kids on, gaming, this Discord, Substack sites or whatever, subreddit, and who are they dealing with? And so we can have another conversation on this, but it's we'll see what the court does with him. Again, due process, innocent until proven guilty, but this shooter may wind up going the same way that Charlie did.
Yeah,
they even have a firing squad deaths in legal execution in Utah, so we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, you have to realize that this world doesn't belong to the boomers like you and me anymore.
I get it.
It belongs to this new generation that's coming up.
I get it.
So those people that are in that generation, you need to ask yourself, what type of a world are you going to leave for the ones coming after you? That's what's important. So shifting gears again, Jim, with ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they've been in the news a lot with all their law enforcement actions, their deportations, their political controversies, the wearing mask, and all these other things, and recent headlines that involve some of the raids, and the one in Chicago that happened this past weekend, where one of their vehicles was rammed and it wound up into a chase. Well, the driver of the vehicle, from the information I have, was shot and killed by federal agents. You want to comment on that, Jim?
Yeah, there's some debate whether that person had a gun, semi-automatic, a weapon of some sort, or the driver did. But that person, at least one of the people involved in one of these incidents, definitely attempted to kill ICE agents, singular or plural, and the ICE agents protected themselves, used deadly force, and it seems like a justified homicide on the part of law enforcement. Of course, it'll be reviewed, and everyone will go over it and make sure that's the case. We'll see what lawsuits, if any, come out of it. But I mean, we look at Washington, D.C., and I understand that's the district, it's a federal district, but the mayor basically agreed to allow the federal takeover. It's not even a takeover, it's the federal assistance with National Guard, with other agents. And I have friends on the Metro PD, that's the Washington, D.C. police. They love it. And they have more neighbors and residents coming out to them. Thank you. We finally feel safe. And these are in some of the tougher neighborhoods, not just walking along the mall or something by the Washington Monument. So they love it in DC. So that's a city where it was done right. But you get cities like Chicago and Portland where the elected officials come out and they're condemning ICE, they're condemning the National Guard, and that only foments this negative actions even more so by the wackos out there that are protesting and tormenting these agents, these officers, day in and day night. They can yell what they want, say what they want, but they're shooting Roman candles at them. They're throwing ice water bottles at them, and other methods, ramming cars, as you said. So, and I know there's an accusation that the ICE is putting zip ties on young kids. Well, someone researched that meme, and it was an illegal immigrant father that, for fun, quote unquote, put a zip tie on his young kid. Of course, recorded it, put it out on X or TikTok, whatever it was on, and that's the one everyone's borrowing from. That in fact, kids were hogtied or zip tied or handcuffed by ICE. So, as usual, there's bad information out there. It's probably purposefully put out there as bad information just to get the people that don't really follow the news too much, or quite frankly, aren't that bright, and they just fall into this sort of this trap that everything is just evil out there, and they have to go out and protest. And of course, they're like the useful idiots, as the old Soviets used to talk about. But it's the leaders behind this and the people that are putting money into it that really have to be identified. And I hope that's coming down the road very soon.
And I'm sure that everybody in our audience is already aware of this, but when they were being surrounded by a crowd, these same ICE agents this past weekend, they called assistance to Chicago PD. And Chicago PD, as they were reacting, were told by their patrol chief to stand down and not to assist. I am so disturbed by that, and you should be too. And I'm going to tell you why. Once the politics divide the men in blue, we're going to have problems. The one thing that I can always say about law enforcement is that we always stuck together no matter what. When there was something that happened, we joined our resources together to solve the problem, to keep the community safe. And when you start dividing us and not let us support each other, we're entering dangerous grounds, my friends. We really are. Now, you can always say ICE actions are controversial. Police actions in general are always controversial because they're going to, no matter what they do, they're going to ignite strong reactions from both sides of the political spectrum. So a lot of people are going to say this is great. Other people are going to say it's lousy. You got to remember, you got to separate the facts from the political rhetoric whenever you discuss anything that has to do with immigration enforcement. Can't get caught up in that political rhetoric, and that's what's happening. It really is. It's not about that. It's about these individuals that have broken the law by entering this country illegally. That's all it is. It's nothing more than that.
15 to 25 million over the last 4 years,
yes.
And none in the last 8 months or so. And now one administration let them in, another administration's trying to scoop them up, and the deal is out there. Turn yourself in. I think it's up to $2,500 now. You turn yourself in and go back, we'll arrange free flight back and $2,500. It's actually not a bad deal. You've been here a few years, made some money, probably sent most of it back to another country, which is a lot of times what happens. But whatever. But if you're going to stay behind, then you're going to run the risk of this happening. and they say, oh, other citizens are being arrested too. Well, what some of the media conveniently leave out, these are the ones that are throwing rocks and bricks and shooting Roman candles and ramming cars at ICE agents. And yeah, they may be the citizens who have to get arrested and not the other one. But in conclusion, in addition to the illegals, and I mean, yeah, ICE is just trying to get a job done. They have a constitutional duty to do exactly what they're doing. And the fact that we have this reaction just makes no sense. And if that's what you think your party needs to do to win votes over in the last when President Trump was elected, 10 months ago, I guess almost 11 months ago now, with exactly this mandate, I don't think the Dems are helping themselves here. They could support ICE at least by saying, hey, everyone, turn yourself in, take the money, and we'll help you. We'll work with the Republicans to get you back in the country if you didn't commit crimes, things like that. But no, they have to do this song and dance, and it's dangerous for everybody in that regard.
Yeah, the division is the worst I've ever seen it in this country, and it's not good. And if we don't come together as one to battle some of the social problems we're having, they'll never be solved. And I want to talk about two instances that occurred in the last month, Jim. There were two shootings. One happened in Minneapolis at a school, and the other happened at a church. And let's talk about the school first. And these are things that are becoming all too common. And it's almost as though when you talk about these situations that you would expect community shock, student and staff trauma, and those things happen. But it's almost immediately dismissed. And to take something like that and minimize it is also dangerous, because that means we're becoming immune to these types of situations that are happening. And we never want to become immune to this. When do we ever become immune to taking human life?
A little anecdote. It's been a busy 6 weeks for me with doing some TV work, but that was late August at School, I believe, in Minneapolis, where this shooting occurred. And the Fox studio van came to my house. My grandchildren, who were 8 and 6, were visiting. And I said, hey, do you want to come in and see this van, what it looks like? I took pictures of them sitting in the seat before I went on the air, of course. And the producer, the tech guy, was fine with doing that. And then they got out of the van. I had to whisper to their parents, don't let them watch me on TV, because this is too horrific what I'm going to discuss. And of course, they weren't allowed to watch me on. They're too young anyway for hard news. But it just, yeah. Look at Grandpa goes on TV sometimes, and that's kind of cool. But in this case, don't listen, because both my granddaughters go to a Catholic school. Ray, I know you may have started overseas, but I think we both did most of our schooling in Catholic grade schools and high
Yes.
schools. And can you imagine that being part of your everyday curriculum, knowing how to duck and hide? And these kids weren't technically even in the classroom at the school in Minneapolis. They were in a church, their very first day at school. And these kids' lives are completely ruined. And I was on the air that night. It was again with Laura. I go on with Jesse sometimes too. And right before I went on the air, no one whispered in my ear this time, like just a week and a half ago. But there was a 10-year-old boy they interviewed right before I went on the air. It was recorded. And this kid was so articulate, so well spoken, and he's describing what it's like to watch his friend next to him get shot in the back. And the kid was going on and explaining the details without being too graphic. And it went on for about a minute. And I'm ready to go on the air. And I'm listening to this kid, and I was just getting so steamed up inside. And that's when I really came out for the first time. I can talk about the profiling stuff. This person was mission oriented. There was leakage beforehand, and some kind of psychological trauma. There's stressors that occurred. But I just I didn't lose it per se, but you want to go back and look at that clip. I said, there's something wrong with people like this. We knew it was a kid who was transitioning. And I even said, the drugs they're giving them for this, he may have been, heavy into pot smoking. And within a day or two, they read some of his messages, the shooter's messages. And he said, yeah, this transitioning thing was kind of screwed up. I never should have done it. And yeah, I've been smoking too much pot too. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he said. And my friends who even watched the clip said, boy, you were on fire, on this clip, Fitz. And I was. And I said, the parents out there, it's pissing me off. I know we did the best job we could do, Ray, with our kids, But there are some parents out there that I think just don't know how to say no to their kids. And this kid, the mother allowed him to change his name at 17 years of age. And maybe she could have said no. And of course, you have to say no when they're 2 and 3 years old. You don't start when they're 17. And I really kind of lit into some of the parents. I got a bunch of emails from people I don't even know me. They got my address off the my website, and they said we agree with you 100%. There are too many screwed up kids out there, and the parents are to blame to some degree. Not every single case, of course, are the parents to blame. All kids are going to make mistakes. I certainly did, but I never thought of shooting up a school with little kids in it. You're off the behavioral chart when you do something like that, and parents have to claim responsibility. I'll leave it with this. I don't think I said this on TV that night, but it's well known the Israelis back in the day when a suicide bomber would blow something up, they would go to the house, they'd get the people out, wherever that person lived and their family, they would bulldoze the house down and say, all right, your son, your nephew, your grandchild is going to blow our people up. They have to know in advance the house is going to be bulldozed. That's sort of Machiavellian. I get it. You can argue both ways on that. But if nothing else, there should be civil actions or civil suits. Your kid does something like this, maybe tries to shoot a president or shoots up a school, not including the school in Memphis, there's going to be civil litigation coming against you. And we're going to take everything from you that we have if we can prove our case. We don't bulldoze the house, but maybe take all their assets. Something has to be here. And so start encouraging parents. So, you know what? My kid really is acting goofy. He's bought these weapons. He's not coming out. He's not bathing. He goes on these websites all day long with these gaming people. Maybe I better call the police and at least report him. And that would be a mitigating defense if they at least reported this person to the police. So
That's a hard thing
parents
for
have
a
to do a
parent
better
to do,
job.
Jim. That's a hard thing for a parent to do, but it's something that needs to be done. Look, there's a systemic mental health crisis in this country with our youth. And especially, like you say, with the drug epidemic that's going on, with the giving of drugs to these kids for these sex change operations, they're not physically or mentally able to handle these things at such a young age. And you're introducing them to these things, which is not healthy. Switching gears over to the Mormon shooting, where's it going to be next? In a grocery store? Well, that happened in Buffalo. Where's it going to happen? At a party? Where's it going to happen? Yeah, well, that happened out in San Bernardino. I mean, where's it going to happen? In Times Square? Yeah, that happened there too. Wherever you go, these things are happening. There's no place that's safe. There's really no place that's safe. There's, the last two, both in church. The one in Minneapolis and the one in the Mormon church. You look at the role of parents in this, you look at the stress and the human impact. But what really struck me about this shooting in the Mormon church was the community solidarity after the tragedy by the Mormon church. I thought it's almost to me what Erica Kirk did in forgiving. They were almost as forgiving. And I thought that, wow. I mean, here's the thing that I'm angry about, and these people are forgiving. Wow.
Well, that weekend alone, there was a veteran who shot up a restaurant, a waterside restaurant in South Carolina, killed 3 people, took off on his boat, was eventually apprehended.
Mm-hmm.
And then the very next morning, there was another vet, and my son's a vet. I'm not picking on vets, and I've had this discussion with him. But but that doesn't mean how many millions of vets are there out there, and certainly presently serving. That doesn't mean there's any higher propensity for violent crime with veterans than others. It just so happens that weekend, I think that was 2 weeks ago now, at the time of our recording here, that event occurred, and for entirely different reasons, it seems. The one guy in South Carolina ran for president. He's filing all these specious lawsuits, and they're getting tossed out of courts, all kind of goofy stuff. And then apparently this guy in Michigan, he dated a Mormon woman years ago. It ended, poorly from his perspective. So he goes take it out on a bunch of people. I'll leave it with this. I think these are soft targets. And if Congress can be well protected as hard targets, if airports can, which they should be, we got to start doing this with schools. And certainly churches and perhaps, even restaurants. And I know when I go out nowadays, I'm I've always been very conscious, and Ray, we've been out together, and we always look around, we both want to sit with our backs to the wall, but that makes it look a little bit odd, just the two of us. So, but the other one will have the back if they are looking out in the protective mode. So, but you really have to take this into consideration today, and it's just a screwed up world in many ways. Maybe this is a trend. Maybe this is some kind of a cycle. Maybe we get off some of the people. And when we talked about drugs, it's not just marijuana. It's not just, uh, but some of the COVID vaccines. We don't know what's in there. And again, going back to the Ritalin, some of these kids were on at 3, 4, 6 years of age. Now they're all coming together. This toxicological porridge, I've been saying, as of recent here, and we just don't know what it does to the young brain.
We don't.
And who cares if you want to transition or something in your teens, when your brain is fully formed, no one cares. I may or may not use the pronouns you want, but whatever. That's not even important. But it's the kids that we're talking about. And they're the ones that seem, when they're going through this or shortly thereafter in their mid to late teens, by the time they hit early 20s, their brain synapses are not connecting as they should. And they see the whole world as a gaming event where you shoot people down, but they get up, on the next screen and or get back up. So, yeah, we have some problems that I hope we can slowly figure this thing out, Ray, as a culture, or we're not going to survive.
When you look at these attacks on places of worship, they're particularly shocking. And I say that because these spaces are meant to be safe havens. When you go to church, you think, I'm in God's house. I'm safe. Nothing will ever happen to me. This incident, okay, reminds you that no matter where you're at, security planning in all public, religious, private areas, they matter more now than ever. You got to prepare. You need to prepare. The next topic, Jim, is something that you and I spoke about last week. We were talking about false confessions. And I know you had a chance to kind of experience this firsthand. Not that someone gave you a false confession, but someone was speaking about false confessions. And, you were pretty frank with me. You said it was kind of a mess. And it highlighted a lot of misconceptions about law enforcement and interrogation techniques, which may be worth unpacking for our listeners. What do you think?
Well, Ray, I think we can scratch the surface right now because I know we have some questions from our listeners, and we also have some promotions to talk about. But yeah, real quick, it doesn't matter where it happened, but I was aware of a talk being given by a psychologist who does a lot of work with false confessions. And he actually personally invited me to this thing months ago. And I was debating, do I want to go to this or not? And I did go with some friends. And this guy was, I have never been to a worse presentation in my life. I'm debating whether to use his name or not. I think for now I'll hold off on it. I was actually thinking early on if he gave an intelligent conversation, laying out, this side, that side, he would conceivably be a guest on Cold Red, and you and I could talk to him. But this guy was not civil at all. He went 40 minutes quoting Chris Rock, Law and Order episodes, Oprah Winfrey. He brought up the Central Park rape case from 40 years ago, and also Amanda Knox in Italy. They were the only cases and references and sites that he could come up with. And he claimed he worked some other cases, but he didn't give any sites, states, cities. I didn't even need names. But I even said, well, these are kind of apocryphal. And he jumped right back at me. Are you interrogating me? Like as if I'm using interrogation techniques that are supposedly been condemned in the
He felt
Reed
threatened,
technique.
Jim. He felt threatened.
I guess I didn't read him his rights, but he wasn't in custody and wasn't under arrest. And he didn't understand that concept. He thinks it's not fair. So again, we're just scratching the surface here because we're going to get into some other things in our brief sort of me and you episode tonight. But it's a shame. I felt sorry for this audience of about 50 people. They're just hearing this one-sided version. And I raised my hand. In fact, one person asked a question of the psychologist. It wasn't the first question. I didn't even raise my hand right away when it finally opened to Q&A. And said, Doctor, what does law enforcement think about when they've done these false confessions? What does a law enforcement officer think when this happens? And I just said, I'm a law enforcement officer. Can I answer that question? Oh, you trying to take over my presentation? No, I'm offering to answer his question. Oh, I'm not qualified to answer. I said, you're actually not specifically qualified to answer the question he just asked. What does a law enforcement officer think when when there's somehow a false confession. And it just went sort of downhill from there. And I also brought up, and I've told this to some young linguists out there, forensic linguists who want to be experts in the courts. And I said, you can be an advocate. There's nothing wrong with being an advocate for whatever the topic is. Criminal justice, restorative justice, whatever you want to call it. And you can do that. And you can give talks, you can write papers, all that. That's fine. But don't expect to be taken serious as an expert witness. I've testified about a dozen times as an expert witness. It's a very rigorous process you go through. It's both civil courts, federal courts, state, local, and federal. And it's a rigorous process. And I can't imagine being asked on the stand, well, did you ever write a paper where you say, all criminals are wrong all the time or police are right all the time? No, they're not. And it actually, in the debate at this meeting, someone in the audience asked me if I knew any corrupt agents. I said, yeah, in fact, I arrested them. And there are corrupt law enforcement people. And Ray and you and I have said that all the time. Yes, we support law enforcement on Cold Red, but if they're dirty, we're going to call them out. And this whole thing really went downhill. And there's a few other examples I can give from that night alone. But I'll just say this now: there is no systemic issue with false confessions. Every confession nowadays is recorded audibly and audio and video recording. And if it truly was like how this guy was describing, some of the confessions of beatings and no sleep and no food, they'd be played on loops on MSNBC every single night, over and over again. The arguments today about false confessions, and I've had some prosecutors use this term, I didn't coin it, but now there is a false confession industrial complex out there. It's a lot of these academics and these other professionals, quote unquote, their career isn't going where they want it to go. They didn't make tenure or full professor, or they're just not getting the billable hours from other work. So they decide, oh, I know, false confessions. And they just go out and insert themselves in these cases. Oh, yes, of course it was a false confession because this, that, and the other. And are there occasionally ones out there? Yeah, there are. But it's usually involving language, versus the, or perhaps the person's not a native English speaker who has read their Miranda warnings. These are legitimate arguments you can have back and forth. But this was not the argument that this guy was bringing up. Every cop is dirty. Every cop's doing these false confessions all the time just to put, marginalized people in jail. And I just, we never yelled, never cursed or called names, but I just couldn't help but be demonstrative with this guy. And he didn't seem to like it, but I just think it would be almost a waste of time, Ray, to bring him on Cold Red.
Can I ask you a question? You think...
Is this an interrogation? Wait a minute.
Well, no, but it could be. But do you think you'll still get a Christmas card from him this year? Now you're out of his Fab Five?
No. It's, I've just, and Natalie was with me when we both went to academic conferences. Natalie's my wife. She's also a forensic linguist, retired professor at Georgetown University. And academics can go at each other at these conferences, but usually it's a polite back and forth. This guy, he just could not stand. You can tell he's one of these people that lives in an echo chamber, and everyone around him tells him the same thing all the time. If your guilty people are getting away with crimes because of this junk science, he called the Reed technique junk science. I read him U.S. versus Jacques, and some professor like him was just going on in his testimony about how the Reed technique, which is an interviewing technique, it's been around like 50 years.
Yeah.
And there's no games played. There's no beating.
I took the class. How about you?
Yeah.
Did you take the class?
Yeah. I never did take the class. And I told them that.
I did.
But there's no underhanded stuff. And I basically read this summary of this judge, said this other professor goes on and on complaining, besmirching, and denigrating the Reed technique, but offered no specific examples. I said, that's just like you today in front of this group. So the judge threw out the defense request to suppress the confession. And I don't know what happened in the case. I read about another case, that same thing there too. It's just,
Jim,
everyone's read their rights today.
No, but I think it's a good idea. I think this is a great topic. I think that our audience would like to hear this. Let's see. I'll do a little research, see if I can find.
Too.
Well, we don't need someone, to talk about the other side of false confessions, but someone like this that you talk to, that's maybe not as far leaning as that, but is willing to take a look at both sides. Maybe we should have someone on, or maybe just you and I talk about it. I have plenty of cases to talk about.
And I've taken plenty of confessions as a cop, as an agent.
Mhm.
Never has one kicked back at me.
Nope.
And the Supreme Court has ruled you're allowed to tell certain untruths to a person you're interviewing. Like, well, Joe, how about if we told you we found your fingerprint inside the house that we think you burglarized? And even if you didn't, and the guy then admits to it, and you get other facts that corroborates the story. That's been held up by the Supreme Court. You're allowed to
Absolutely.
do that. Now, you can't tell, say, a woman, we're going to take your kids away from you if you don't tell us what happened. You can't
Correct.
do things like that.
You can't.
But
That's
you can
coercion.
tell DNA, fingerprints, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, this guy, he's telling the audience, like, he's making that sound illegal when it's not.
You remember the movie? You remember the movie The Four Brothers with Mark Wahlberg, and they got in a fight through a guy that people know. There's four brothers. There's three African American and a white guy, and they were all brothers. They were kind of all foster kids, and they all lived with this old white woman who was killed. And they wind up taking care of the guy, the drug dealer that killed their mother, who was their foster mother, all the four brothers. And the cops wind up killed all these drug dealers. And the whole story is that Mark Wahlberg is in there and they're beating the crap out of him while they're sitting there. And they pull something out. They say, look, we got your fingerprint on this thing. And he start laughing and they just walked away. So it happens all the time, even on TV when they try and do that stuff as well. That's a good movie, Four Brothers, if you want to see a good movie.
I'll add it
Hey,
to my list.
Jim, we're running out of time here. So what I want to do is we have some questions, and I'm going to read a small sample of the questions that there's one here directly for you, but I want to read these questions. I'll start off with a question from Tanya in New York. She says, why is it that the VDOC Society only reviews cold cases presented by law enforcement and not their families?
Yeah, and I usually respond by first saying good question, and I'll be consistent here. That is a good question. We need law enforcement to come, and Ray, you're a member too, so we could both answer this, but the VDOC Society needs law enforcement to come and stand in front of the room and provide all the evidence they have. Family members don't have all the evidence of a case, even if they know their loved one was murdered or raped or both. They just don't have the facts of the case. Law enforcement does. So there's a lot of emotionality involved with family members, and they could certainly add that to a case, but it takes the facts and the evidence that only the officers, investigators have. And they tell us, look, we're telling you everything, VDOC people, and, we don't want some of this stuff getting out to the public because only the police and the murderer will say that knows. So, Ray, I'm kind of retired now from taking cases. Natalie still takes some cases. We only like to work through lawyers. It almost doesn't sound fair. Well, I don't have the money to work a lawyer, but you need that third party in between. Otherwise, you don't know if you're getting the exact facts as you may need to render an opinion linguistically or in terms of solving a case. So what I always tell family members, contact the investigative agency. Tell them to talk to me because it's a free trip for them. The VDOC Society pays their way. Bring the case in, and we will gladly work through that case with them, but we can't just do it with the family. Good question. It would be nice if somehow we can get around that, but from a logistical and professional perspective, we need the actual evidence.
I want to add a little bit to that, Jim, just so those people that are hearing the term VDOC Society for the first time. The VDOC Society is a group of law enforcement, forensic experts, and legal experts that work together in trying to solve cold cases. VDOC is named after Francis Vidocq, who was first a criminal in France and then became an investigator once he learned some other things. And he was a very good detective back in his day in the 1800s. And so that's what it's named after, the Francis Vidocq Society. And I don't know what the exact number. I know there's 82 full members, which Jim and I are both one of. And then there's a lot of other members after that. But just to add on what Jim said, as a family member, you are not privy to all of the investigative materials that law enforcement has. Law enforcement, for many reasons, for the integrity of the case, does not share a lot of the information that's going on in the case. You would not have the same information that's shared to the VDOC Society. That's why family members are not invited to these events. They're not asked to come in. They're not asked to present. because just as Jim says, you don't have all the information that's there. But Tanya, great question. Thank you so much. I hope we answered it for you. Jim, this is strictly for you. It's from Ashley in North Park. How did the Unabomber make a living during his reign of terror?
Another good question, Ashley. That's a lot of people don't think to ask that question because he lived in a cabin by himself for most of his adult life. Basically, he would help out some of his neighbors. They may have lived, a quarter of a mile from him, but he would go and help them dig fence posts, and maybe just, the beginning of the planting season or the end of it, move heavy bales of hay, whatever it was. And he wrote in his diary, which I read after his arrest, of course, that he could get by on $200 a year. So his property was paid for, his cabin was paid for, and he didn't need anything else except his taxes, a couple $100 a year, and that's all he needed. When he started his bombing campaign, he moved back with his family to Chicago, worked with his brother for a while, made some money, but then once he moved back to the woods, Montana Hills, he in fact hit his mother up for insurance money when his father died. There was a life insurance policy. This is all in my book 3, A Journey to Center of Mind, book 3. I do actually cover this topic, but good question.
Great job, Jim. Thank you for that, Ashley. Our next question is from Eric in North Carolina. After a full season immersed in the details of the Justice for Shannon Sheber, what was the single biggest takeaway for each of us? What would you like listeners to take heart regarding sexual assault survivors?
You start, Ray.
I'll go first. The biggest takeaway for me is gaining a full understanding of what the victim actually goes through. As an FBI agent, very rarely did we have the opportunity to sit down with victims and talk to victims, because most of the cases that we worked were on a bigger, larger scale. So there were multiple victims or there were larger things. But to see and to talk to them, and you heard some things on the show, and there's other things that I'm not at liberty to share with you that they told us off mic about some of the things they go through. And one of the things that you have to understand and you need to remember, especially about these victims and survivors, is the fact that it's just not the person that was assaulted. You have a spouse, you have a partner, you have a parent, you have a brother, you have a sister, you have friends. They're all affected by what happened to that sexual assault victim / survivor. Never, ever forget that. And the thing is that they never, ever forget what happened to them. They live with that for the rest of their lives. And that's one of the most difficult things for someone to do. And I hope that nobody ever has to experience that, because it is horrible. I've only been told, but I'm a kind of an empathetic person. So I really feel what's happened to these individuals. And I've talked to a lot of rape survivors, but not in the detail that I had the opportunity to speak with the victims on our show. Jim?
Yeah, I don't think I can say it better than that. And we kind of covered this in our last episode together. I'll just add sort of an end note here that we criticize the Philly PD to some degree, and Chuck Boyle, a retired Philly detective, did. But I do want to remind everyone the truly bad person in this case, and I don't like using bad guys' names on our show, but his name is Troy Graves, still serving time, multiple life sentences in Colorado. He's the true bad guy to this. And I want to make sure that everyone remembers that. But at the same time, police have to take every case and respect the victims and their reportage as it comes in and take it from there. But I think Ray summed it up really well.
Yeah, the last question here is a question from Jill. And Jill says, for listeners who live within the Center City, Philadelphia area, what do you believe is a long-term societal legacy of the attacks on the community and its residents?
Why don't you start on this one?
Well, to be honest with you, when you look at this here and you look at the residents of Center City, Philadelphia, the long-term effects of this is erosion and rebuilding of trust. When you look of the lasting impact on how residents, and we know this firsthand, how they view public institutions, in other words, law enforcement, city government, and even the media. After a lot of these major incidences, trust tends to fracture, and the rebuilding of it can take years. And a lot of times you need the transparency of leadership and community involvement to do that. There's also Philadelphia has a long history of grassroots organizing. So crises have kind of sparked civic engagement. When you look at it, they have neighborhood watches, they have social justice movements, and there's psychological and generational impacts as well. And then you have urban and social reform. So it's the legacy of these attacks on the Philadelphia city community lives in both the scars and the strengths of the victims and survivors that it affected. Jim?
Ray, you waxed poetic there and very eloquently. I visit Center City, Philadelphia, at least once a month. That's where the VDOC Society meetings are held. I can't really speak to, of course, what is the ongoing, if you will, legacy of this case. A lot of young people, and we received emails early on, Ray, when we started in the early summer of 25 on this quest to discuss the Center City rapist case, which, as a reminder, everyone went to Fort Collins, Colorado afterwards. A lot of young people don't even know about it and don't even remember it, or one or the other, or both. So there was no pleasure in reminding everyone what happened here of mistakes made. But many large cities and many smaller communities have similar situations like this. It may not be 14 separate rapes with one murder in there between two different cities, as in case we talked about, but even two or three are too many, and it can leave a real scar on a town and the mindset of the people in there, and especially the marginalized women in some cases that just always feel vulnerable, even if they weren't victimized, but because they knew what happened around them, or 5 or 10 or even 25 years ago, like it was in the case we discussed this past summer. So yeah, it goes on, and the scars don't heal easily. What I hope, Ray, if nothing else, in these 20 episodes, we try to minimize any further scarring involving poor police judgment or poor police work. Women will probably still be raped, unfortunately, and men too in some cases. But let's make sure, I'm hoping, and we've had some feedback from law enforcement people, let's hope from now on these cases are all taken seriously. Each one is weighed and engaged, by its own merits, and the investigation continues from that point on. So let's hope that the police are getting this right now, and every woman, every victim is certainly taken very seriously when when these crimes are first reported.
Well stated, Jim. Well stated. All right. Well, listen, that kind of ends our show for tonight. But before we go, Jim and I have a special announcement. In celebration of our 100th episode of the Cold Red podcast, my co-host, James R. Fitzgerald, has graciously offered to give away a copy or two of his new book, Journey to the Center of the Mind 4, to a handful of lucky fans. I also will be giving away a few copies of my book, 30 Years on the Run, The Hunt for the Most Prolific Bank Robber in History. To enter, all you have to do is leave a review for Cold Red on your favorite podcast app and include the hashtag pound cold red 100. Again, that's pound cold red COLD RED 100. We will be picking our winners in the next 2 weeks. Jim, final thoughts?
Well, just let me add to that. I have regular books, book 3 and book 4, that I'm willing to give away, and also audiobooks. But you have to live in the US or the UK for the audiobooks. And I know we have listeners in the UK. So, and there's a limited number of each of those. And Ray and I are not in competition. His book, 30 Years on the Run, is a great book. I was glad to play a little role in that case. I know I'm at least mentioned a few times, right, Ray?
You are, Jim, as I am in yours.
Just like you are in my book, and because you helped me with, or brought me onto other cases, whatever. And in book 4, one of the books I'm giving away, I think it's chapter 14 or 16. One of them, I discussed the Center City rapist case at length. So if you didn't get enough of it over 20 episodes, there's about 20 pages devoted to that case in book 4. And there's even some nuanced information there also. And put some personal stuff in it near the end and how I do the TV work and teaching different universities and some good guys I've come across, Ray being one of them, a few bad guys, why I don't go on CNN anymore because of what happened in 2018, where they lied about me on the air. So you can read all that stuff in book 4. So yeah, you heard Ray. Go to those sites, put a positive review, and many of you will be getting some gift books in the mail or by digitally by email.
All right. Jim, you want to take us out?
I will, but I do have 2 shout outs I want to give.
Okay, very good.
2 people over the last few months reached out for me, and one was an older guy who now has, I shouldn't say older, but he's not a kid, and I want to tell you about a younger person next. But his name is Zach Zabrowski. He's from Manassas, Virginia. He's, a middle-aged guy. He's read all 4 of my books. He was very positive things he had to say, and I told him I'd give him a nice shout out. He seems like a very nice guy, cares about his country, and I just said, you sound like a candidate for a shout out on Cold Red. And I was asked by a high school student in India if she could do some interviews about psychological profiling. And we worked around it a little bit. And finally, a few Saturdays ago, we had a half hour together. Her name is Sufi Marufa Yasmin from the country of India. I don't have the exact city or town, but she asked some very good questions. And I hope I helped her with her school project. So they're my 2 shout outs, and I hope they are doing well. And Ray, I'll take us out unless you have any final words.
Take us out, Jim.
Everyone, again, thanks for listening to this episode of Cold Red. This is the end of what we call season 7. We're coming back season 8 with our usual style of a different guest every night or every few nights when you listen to us. So again, please continue to follow us on your favorite platforms and like, subscribe. Check us out at coldredpodcast.com and tell your friends about us too. Thanks to Matt McLaughlin, Matt Robinson, our producers, Rick Schilling, our music coordinator. And as always, Ray, it's great having you as a partner for this. Back in the day it was kicking in doors and locking up bad guys, and now doing this podcast together. So thanks again. And everyone, see you next time on Cold Red.